It's been about 2 years since we've shown you the correct method of planting a tree in the landscape. We think this is something that is very important, so we want to make sure we get the best method across to all of our viewers. We will be talking about the method of planting a new tree because in the past, the way that we went about this was different than what we do today. Our new research shows there are things we can do to help the trees better survive. Well, the place we've chosen to show this demonstration is Will Rogers Park here in Oklahoma City at Northwest 36th Street and Portland Avenue. This is a great place to come and look at some different varieties of trees. It is an arboretum with labeled plants, and it's also one of our OBGA affiliate gardens. Well, the person we've chosen to help with this demonstration, once again, is Mark Bays, our State Urban Forestry Coordinator. Hey, Mark.
Hey, good to see you, Steve.
Welcome back to the program.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I appreciate you showing in this part of it because this is one of my favorite places in Oklahoma City because I live just next to here, so it's always nice to come over here.
It's a beautiful area.
It really is. It's one of those hidden jewels in Oklahoma City, and they're doing a really good job of maintaining it and continuing to plant trees and everything.
Okay. Well, we're going to add to the beauty with another tree we're going to plant here in a little bit.
Yeah.
Mark, what are some of the things that homeowners need to first think about before they go to the nursery to even start looking for a tree?
Right. That's a great question. I'm glad you've asked it because and knowing what we know today is so much more than we knew years and years ago, and you even mentioned that. And we need to continue to look to research to really help guide us through the process of planting a tree. If you think about it, you plant a tree once and it's there for potentially hundreds of years. So
quite an investment.
Let's make the best choice today for the longevity of that particular tree. Probably the first thing to consider about planting a tree is where you're planting it. What kind of soil are you putting that tree in? And so it's really helpful to get a soil analysis done or look in the area where you're planting the trees and see what other trees do well in that area. So we have to first understand the kind of soil that we're putting that tree in first. Secondly, you need to think about some of the things that are in the ground besides the soil. In urban areas, what do we have? We have a lot of utilities coming in. We have a lot of sidewalks. We have hardscapes. We have houses and everything. So you have to think about how much space you have because that's going to determine the size of the tree that you can potentially plant in that place.
Okay.
And it's the size of the volume, what's underground and also what's overground. I mean, so often we look up for utility lines and things like that, but we forget what's going on underground. There's a lot of hidden utilities sometimes that we don't think about.
Okay, so water lines and gas lines,
Yeah.
You could maybe go with a smaller tree in those areas. I guess you still don't want to plant directly over
Right.
any of those lines, but I guess just depending on that soil volume, you could bring in a tree spade and get a large tree. But
Right. Before you ever even dig a hole, you probably need to call the local utilities. Call
Okay,
Okie.
the Okie number.
There's the 1-800 number. That's I don't put a shovel in the ground before ever doing that, and so I think that's important. I planted a tree a couple years ago in my backyard, and it was real helpful because right where I wanted to put it, it was the gas line coming into my house, and I didn't realize that. So I didn't, it's a good thing I didn't dig there. So,
okay,
so
good
yeah.
idea.
So yeah, that's it. The soil volume, and then find out where the utilities are. Figure out how much space you have above and below, and then you could go to the nursery, having the soil test, and that's what's really helpful because the people at the nursery are going to ask you all these different questions as well, and so be educated yourself to have all this information before you go to the nursery, so then they can help you choose a tree that's very appropriate for your location.
Okay.
So a lot of pre-planning.
If you go to a park like Will Rogers here and write down several names of trees, then you could take that to your nursery as well, and they could maybe let you know which of those would be appropriate.
Right, and that's what's wonderful about the Arboretum here is because we need to think about the size of the tree at maturity. I'm not suggesting thinking about only the size of the tree. You can get trees in all different sizes, so we need to think about the mature size of the tree, and this is a wonderful place to do that, to walk through here, see what trees do well in this setting, write their names down, figure out what kind of soil you have, figure out how much space you have, and then take all those names to the nursery and say, this is how much, what do you suggest? And the tree might not even be here. There may be new cultivars out there too that they might not yet have planted here, some improved varieties. And so if you have a particular tree that you found interesting, maybe it's not available in the market anymore, maybe there's improved cultivars on that. So just knowing a basic name of what you might want is helpful to bring there.
Okay, and then once you get to the nursery, I guess there are different ways that trees come that we also need to look at.
Yeah, I'm like a kid in a candy store when I go there, and it's, you know, they come in all different types of containers, and the tree that we chose today is in a container, an actual plastic container. So why don't we look at some of the different kinds of plastic containers out there, because there are a lot of different ones out on the market. I think it's important for us to, you know, to look at what those containers might be.
There is a difference.
Yeah. Here, this one is probably one of the more common ones. It's just a straight plastic container. If you look on the inside of it, it's kind of a smooth container. It has some holes in the bottom, down in through here, and that's for when they put the soil volume, they plant the tree in there, and water needs to escape. They have these in all different sizes of containers, you know, from 1 gallon for shrubs on up higher. You know, they probably even have them as big as 100 gallon. That's a pretty heavy tree, yeah. So you know, so that's a large container. So this is one of the just standard basic containers that's been around for a long, long time. This is probably a newer container here. This is a little different because if you can look on the inside here, you can see a few different grooves. And the reason why this is a groove container, yes, it's a little more attractive, but it serves a function too, because as the roots grow in this container and they hit this slick pot, sometimes they have the tendency to kind of grow around this pot and cause some circling roots. And I know that you've recently aired a little segment about girdling roots in the landscape. And so some of that actually starts back at the nursery when the tree is planted. If you leave a tree too long in the pot, some of those circling roots may form. So this pot here is one that may lessen some of those circling roots.
Okay, but you definitely don't want to purchase a tree if you can tell it's been in that pot way too long.
Absolutely, because any of those large circling roots that are starting to form in that container are gonna, you know, the tree may not suffer today, but again, remember we talked about the tree being there 100 years from now. Well, 10, 15 or so years from now, when those tree roots grow and expand, they can actually suffocate the tree and cause problems later. So,
start, you know, choking that tree later on.
Exactly. So this is a really cool and different container here too. It's kind of like the next version of it. If you look on the inside here, you can kind of see all these little jagged areas and everything too.
It's like stair steps.
It is kind of like stair steps. And what this helps do is as those trees grow around, there's no way it can kind of continue to grow around that. And so it kind of redirects the root down to the inside. On all these holes here, you know, you still have the little hole here where the water can drain out and everything. And so this is just another style of container that's out there. So, and any one of these containers though in the nursery, just make sure that you go and look at the tree, kind of test it, rock it to make sure it's real sturdy in there. If you see roots that are actually a lot of fibrous roots kind of poking out the bottom of the bucket here on any one of these, that's a hint that it may have been in there a little bit too long.
And also sometimes you can maybe see the large roots up at the top, starting that circular pattern.
Yeah, just kind of dig down a little bit in the soil and kind of see where those roots are. And if you can see that, a lot of times those roots are right up high on that.
And also if you have a tree with a 4-inch diameter trunk in a pot like this, that's a pretty good hit too, right?
Yeah, there's some national nursery standards that you know, that most of the nurseries follow. Sometimes stock just gets left a year or so. Sure. A lot of times it's on sale, so I'd question the things that are on sale. Make sure that they're not too big for that container. Something like this is really what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
I mean, you can get a real sense here. Just look at the girdling that's going on with that. This obviously is a tree that was left way too long in that small container. This is probably about a 1.5, maybe 2 gallon container. I'm not really sure, but just look at all that circling. Amazing. Now it's not that pronounced, you know. In a lot of cases, this is just the most extreme case I think I've ever seen, but this is what you're trying to avoid, obviously, because with those circling roots, as they grow in diameter, they're just going to suffocate, choke the tree out.
Well, Mark, when it comes to planting the tree, there's definitely a best way to do that, right. And let's go show folks how to do that best method.
About it. That's great.
Well, the tree that we've chosen to plant here in Will Rogers Park is an Oklahoma redbud. And Mark, looks like it's growing in one of those round containers. Right. And we'll get into a little bit later the details of actually planting this. But the plastic containers are not the only type of containers that trees are available in the nursery.
Right, this is just one style. You visit a nursery and you'll see all sizes of containers, all sizes of trees and everything. I think it's important for us to look at the different containers that trees are available in, because there's some special considerations that you need to do depending on the kind of container. The planting technique is pretty much the same. So let's just look at a couple of these different ways that trees come in.
Okay.
This is like a fabric container. And this was actually developed here in Oklahoma a long, long time ago by Carl Whitcomb, and it's kind of gone through the different processes. There's other things out there, but this is what's called a grow bag. And this is just a fabric membrane that they plant the tree in the soil. And you can kind of see here where the tree's roots actually penetrate this fabric container and push through on the outside of the container. Now this container will not ever decompose. Okay. So it's critical, and you can see from this that they've actually cut this off, stripped this off of the root ball when they planted it and pulled it and got rid of it. Now there's a lot of reasons why some trees are planted in this, but the main thing is that this will not ever decompose. You got plastic, you have just this fabric membrane, and so you absolutely need to remove this from the tree. And the best time to do it is when you stick the tree in the ground before you cover all the soil, cut it all out and pull it. Now you will break off some of the roots on that, but that's okay because there's usually plenty of fibrous roots on the inside. This kind of technology seems to kind of promote fibrous root systems somewhat, probably more than maybe just one of these containers. I'm not saying that the containers like this are necessarily a bad thing or anything, but in some cases we tend to see probably a more fibrous root system, and that's a good healthy root system.
Just a different method of growing the trees in the field in the nursery.
That's correct. And then so sometimes if you see these, and again you're when you visit the stores, they'll tell you, they'll make sure that you know that you do absolutely need to remove this.
Not going to degrade.
Not going to degrade. And these are this is kind of like what it looks, a little newer, a little smaller container, but the same thing.
Okay. Sometimes we see the trees grown and balled and burlapped.
Yeah, a lot of times, some of the larger trees, this is just regular burlap. And so a lot of times the trees are hand dug out in the nursery field, and when they hand dig it, they wrap the tree's root system and they wrap that soil in place with burlap. And there's all kinds of different burlap out there. This is, you can kind of see, is a green tinted burlap, so I think that this is probably a treated burlap that's going to prevent it from decaying very long. I mean quickly. Sure. And so, really the only reason the burlap's around that root system is to hold that soil in place around the root ball. It's important to keep that soil in place so you don't have any root exposure to air and holes.
Holds the soil ball together.
Holds the soil in place. This is another thing. If it's a non-treated burlap, you might get away with not really pulling it off the root ball. I've planted trees and seen trees that that this burlap has been underground for quite some time, a few years actually. If you fold this up like this and you plant it underground, and the tree's roots have to grow through that to get out to the surrounding soil. So that's just another thing that might pose a threat for that tree, and you'd want to minimize that. So I would say you would definitely need to cut this back at least halfway down the root ball whenever you put it in the hole. Okay. So remove this. This is really like a Christmas present. You always take your presents, the wrapping paper off before you play with it, and the only purpose that this is really just to hold that soil in place from where it was planted to the planting site.
Okay, and this needs a little bit of structure to go with it, sometimes to hold that soil ball together, a little bit of strength.
Sometimes with the larger root ball, what you have here is they'll come in these wire baskets, okay? And these wire baskets do a great job of holding larger root balls in place. You want to keep that soil again around the root mass. And so these wire baskets do a really good job. They put them at the time they plant, they hold that soil in place. Sometimes I've seen where these have been left on the root ball.
I've seen that also in a number of landscapes, the wire baskets kind of poking out of the soil around the tree. So
in the short term, that's not a bad thing. In the long term, it may present a problem for the tree. And so I would suggest that whenever these are on there, when you plant the tree in the hole, when you get it in the hole, cut at least the top half of this off. And the reason for that is because we have no way of knowing whether or not this is going to decompose over time. I've pulled a tree out of the ground that was in the ground 15 years, and I know it because the customer planted it when he moved into his house. This wire basket was still intact.
It hadn't rusted.
It hadn't rusted. The roots were all intertwined and everything in it. The tree was going into decline, and I think that posed part of the problem for that tree. So just cut it, wire cutters, halfway.
Okay, at least halfway down.
Yeah.
Okay, with the tree we've got ready to plant here, Mark, there are, I guess, some other things in the nursery that we'd want to look at, like the shape and the form of the tree. Make sure it's an attractive sturdy form, good trunk,
Right.
and that kind of thing?
The container's the first thing, the size of the tree in the container. This has symmetrical branching. That's going to maintain that shape throughout the whole life of the tree. So that's a good thing. Choose a tree that is very symmetrical, good branch unions. There's no scarring on the trunk or anything like that. So this is a real symmetrical tree that, you know, it's going to keep that shape throughout its whole life. Now you might see some things like this, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because in the nursery they do some pruning to kind of cause that tree to kind of develop into a nice healthy crown.
Sure.
At the time you plant it, I would suggest that you do some very minimal pruning. And you know, you mentioned research. Old days we used to say remove, you know, a third of the top of the tree whenever you plant it. We don't do that anymore.
I used to read that all the time when
Yeah.
I was just getting interested in horticulture. Cut back by a third.
Cut back by a third.
Old technology.
Old technology. Don't prune any of the top, because the food production goes on the leaves. You want it there. But certainly small things like this, little nubs that are okay, I'd go ahead and cut them back. And you've talked a number of times about the proper way to prune trees. And so any of these kinds of things, any dead branches, if there happens to be any small tiny crossing branches that are touching,
Rubbing.
do very, very minimal pruning on the tree. So yeah, choose a real tree that's nicely shaped. A little bit of this. On this particular tree, some trees are actually cultivars. In other words, they take cuttings off of trees and they graft them to a rootstock of another tree. At first glance, you might look at that and say, "Oh my, that's just, you know,
Got a dead limb down there."
That's a bad thing." But that's not necessarily the case, because that's the graft union there, and eventually that will just kind of seal off over that, and it won't pose a particular threat. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Just part of the rootstock.
Part of the rootstock. That's
Okay.
right.
All right. Well, Mark, I see you've got the hole here. It's a pretty good size hole.
Right.
And why such a big hole for this small pot?
Well, the best thing that we can do to prepare this tree to grow into the new surrounding soil is to aerate the soil. A lot of times in cities and towns, you have a lot of compacted soil. Even in your yard, by walking across it, you'll compact the soil. So what happens is that, you know, what's the last thing you do before you plant seeds in your garden? You till it up, don't you? So that's
Yeah.
kind of what we're doing here for the tree. We're tilling up a nice wide hole
For the roots?
for the roots to kind of grow out into, because, you know, a lot of these soils are compacted. And so that's why the wide hole and not the deep hole. You can see our bar across here. You don't want to plant a tree particularly deep, especially in Oklahoma. We have a lot of clay soil everywhere, and that would just cause a tree to kind of become waterlogged. It's kind of like a little clay pot that's too deep. So it's important to plant that tree at least the level that's in the container. And sometimes it's okay to plant it just a little bit higher, especially in a clay soil. And the reason for that is, as you loosen that soil and everything, that tree may settle a little bit. So if you plant it just a little bit high, it may settle in that hole and originally be at the ground level. And so that's why we have our cross beam across here, because we can kind of get a sense of what the level of the soil in the plot is, and we put it just a little bit higher on that.
And the part of the state, whether it's eastern Oklahoma or western Oklahoma, can also figure into whether you want to leave it a little bit high or a little bit low. Is that correct?
It depends on the soil.
Okay.
In a clay soil, absolutely, you know, as much as maybe 20%, even a little bit higher of the root ball can be a little higher. You
Okay.
know. If it's in a rich loamy soil, that like a sandy soil that you have a lot of water filtering down through, planting it a little bit high may not be as necessary. So in a clay soil, absolutely just a little bit higher. In a loamy, rich, sandy soil, you know, just put it at the same level.
Okay. So when the soil is returned to the hole, are there any amendments that we want to add?
We should never, again, going back to the research that we talked about, we used to think that was a good thing to do, but no, research says just put the same soil. Don't fake that tree out into believing that the soil's any different around the tree's roots. You want to put the same soil back in there. And so really no amendments are necessary.
Okay.
The one thing you might need to consider, though, is we're fortunate here in Will Rogers Park to have wonderful, rich, top, lush soil. You can kind of get a good sense at it that it's a nice soil. But we're not all fortunate to have that. So sometimes you might want to come in and do a little scarification if you've got a clay soil, to kind of come around here and scarify that just a little bit and break that up just a little bit so those roots can kind of go out into the clay soil.
Okay, that I guess would be kind of the same effect of a round, smooth pot if it was just a real smooth clay saucer we've got here. So
Right.
I guess that again helps those roots kind of dig in a little bit.
Get in a little,
some
and so they don't
traction.
just glaze around
Yeah.
that little clay pot. Same thing holds true if you pull your tree out of the container and you can kind of see a lot of fibrous things, a lot of fibrous roots right around there. You might cut or just slightly scarify those as well, because that might encourage some of those roots to kind of grow out laterally as well. And of course, the next thing is after you put the soil, you water it in, and a good 3 inches of mulch is a good thing to do.
Okay, a 3-inch mulch on top. And again, this just the actual process of digging the saucer and replacing that soil gives you that loose tilled effect. It's going to help those roots quickly get out into the surrounding soil.
Right, absolutely.
Okay, anything else on the initial planting of the tree?
We've only just begun.
Just begun. Okay. Well, I tell you what, next week we'll come back and Mark will join us again. We will look at some other techniques that we need to take care of in getting the tree established, and including some tree wrap, tree staking. That's an issue that I know a lot of people are always talking about. We'll look at different ways to stake trees, some ways we shouldn't stake trees, and we'll also look at keeping a tree that is existing in the landscape in perfect health if we're going to be doing any construction. And Mark will join us and we'll take a look at the survivor tree down at the Oklahoma City National Memorial. So come back next week and get another load of good tree information for Oklahoma.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.